In a clash that shook the California arena, two martial arts legends faced off in a battle not just of fists, but of philosophies, where silence spoke louder than spectacle. Will tradition triumph, or will modern flair steal the show? In the California arena, where spectacle reigned and every seat vibrated with anticipation, a quiet man in black sat unnoticed. A night meant to honor martial arts turned volatile when Donnie Yen, global film icon, branded Chuck Norris a relic. A Hollywood fighter, Chuck Norris wasn't your typical silver-haired guest of honor. For 6 consecutive years, he dominated the karate world stage, a pioneer whose victories carved the path for martial arts in America. He was more than an actor. He was a champion forged in blood and discipline. When Yen challenged him to step into the octagon, the star expected an easy lesson in relevance. He didn't realize he was calling out a man who had spent a lifetime reducing chaos to silence. Norris responded with precision, delivering a calm sweep that shifted the entire philosophy of the arena. What began as entertainment for the crowd became a clash of eras. The California exhibition would never be remembered for its showmanship, but for the night, silence, humbled spectacle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The California arena pulsed with raw energy. Thousands of spectators from across the globe filled every seat, their collective anticipation creating an electric atmosphere that seemed to vibrate through the building's foundation. Massive screens suspended from the ceiling displayed fighter statistics and highlights, while cameras tracked every angle of the octagon positioned at center stage. The International Martial Arts Exhibition, broadcast to millions worldwide, had become the premier showcase for combat sports, a blend of tradition and spectacle where ancient disciplines met modern entertainment. Elena Park adjusted her headset, dark eyes scanning the arena as she prepared for her commentary. Once a championship fighter herself, she'd traded the octagon for the announcer's booth 5 years ago after a career-ending knee injury. The transition had been difficult, but she'd found her voice as the sports conscience, the one who reminded viewers that beneath the lights and cameras lay centuries of discipline and respect. "We're live in 30 seconds. Her producer's voice crackled in her ear. Elena nodded, straightening her blazer. She glanced down at her notes, though she hardly needed them. The night's lineup was emblazed in her memory. 12 exhibition matches culminating in a showcase featuring Donnie Yen, the Hong Kong action star whose presence had sold out the arena in record time. The lights dimmed and the crowd roared in anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Welcome to the 15th Annual International Martial Arts Exhibition." Spotlights swept across the audience as highlight reels played on the screens. Elena leaned into her microphone as the broadcast went live. "Good evening, fight fans. I'm Elena Park, alongside Mike Goldstein, bringing you what promises to be an unforgettable night of martial arts excellence. Tonight's exhibition features fighters from 17 countries representing disciplines from Muay Thai to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Kung Fu to Karate. Her co-commentator chimed in with statistics and predictions, but Elena's attention had drifted to the VIP section. There, sitting quietly in the third row, was Chuck Norris. At 70-plus years of age, the martial arts icon looked remarkably fit in his simple black button-down shirt. Unlike the celebrities around him who chatted and posed for cameras, Norris sat with quiet dignity, his focus entirely on the octagon. And now, the announcer's voice pulled Elena back to the moment. "Please welcome our opening fighters." The crowd erupted as Marcus, the showstopper. Cruz bounded into the arena, music blaring. At 26, Cruz had built his reputation not just on skill, but on spectacle. His entrance was characteristic dancing, playing to the cameras, stopping to take selfies with fans. His social media following had exploded after a series of viral knockout videos, each one more theatrical than the last. "Cruz certainly knows how to make an entrance," Elena commented, keeping her tone neutral despite her distaste for his showmanship. "The showstopper gives the people what they want," her co-commentator replied, "and what they want is entertainment." Cruz's opponent entered with considerably less fanfare. Hiroshi Tanaka, a 35-year-old veteran from Japan, walks steadily toward the octagon, acknowledging the crowd with a simple bow. Tanaka brings 15 years of professional experience to this exhibition, Elena noted. A fifth-degree black belt in karate, with traditional training since childhood. As the fighters were introduced, Elena noticed Donnie Yen taking his seat in the front row. The international star had arrived with a small entourage, his presence immediately drawing attention. Cameras swiveled to capture his reaction as Cruz played to the crowd, flexing and shadow boxing. The bell rang and Cruz immediately launched forward with a flying knee that Tanaka barely dodged. The crowd gasped, then cheered as Cruz followed, with a flurry of punches, pushing Tanaka toward the fence. "Cruz coming out aggressive!" her co-commentator shouted over the noise. "He's not here to feel things out." Tanaka weathered the initial storm, his defense solid as he looked for counters. For the first minute, the match appeared evenly matched Cruz's aggression against Tanaka's technique, but then Cruz landed a spinning back fist that rocked the Japanese fighter. "Oh, Tanaka's hurt," Elena called as Cruz pounced, raining down blows until the referee intervened. The crowd erupted, and Cruz leapt to his feet, running to the edge of the cage and screaming in celebration before the victory was even officially announced. He climbed the fence, pointing to his Instagram handle tattooed on his chest. "And your winner by technical, knockout, Marcus, the showstopper, Cruz." Elena watched as Cruz's celebration continued well past the official announcement. He grabbed the microphone from the announcer's hand. "That's how it's done," he shouted. "Follow me on socials for more reality checks. Who's next? Who's next?" In the VIP section, Donnie Yen applauded, clearly impressed by the young fighter's performance, if not his sportsmanship. When Cruz spotted him, he pointed directly at the action star. "Donnie Yen, the man himself. That's how we do it in real fights, brother." Yen smiled and gave him a thumbs up, which only encouraged Cruz further. "Ain't no choreography in here. This is the real deal." Elena frowned at the implied disrespect. "Cruz with an enthusiastic celebration," she said diplomatically, but perhaps forgetting that this exhibition was created to showcase not just fighting skill, but the discipline and respect that form the foundation of martial arts. As Cruz finally exited, still playing to the roaring crowd, Elena noticed Chuck Norris hadn't moved a muscle during the entire spectacle. His expression remained impassive, eyes tracking Cruz with quiet assessment rather than judgment. Coming up next, Elena continued, "We have 3 more preliminary matches before our main showcase featuring the legendary Donnie Yen, whose career has bridged the worlds of traditional martial arts and global cinema." The energy Cruz had ignited continued to burn through the next matches. Each fighter seemed determined to outdo the previous one, not just in technique, but in showmanship. The crowd fed on it, growing louder with each knockout. Each celebration during a break between matches, cameras caught Donnie Yen and Marcus Cruz talking animatedly at ringside. Cruz gesturing expansively while Yen nodded, occasionally glancing toward where Norris sat. "Looks like our rising star has found a fan in Donnie Yen," Elena's co-commentator observed. "Or perhaps a mentor," Elena replied, noticing how Yen seemed to be encouraging Cruz's brashness. Tonight's exhibition is certainly highlighting the evolution of martial arts from traditional discipline to modern entertainment. As the arena lights dimmed for the next introduction, Elena couldn't help but wonder if something was being lost in that evolution, something essential that couldn't be captured by cameras or measured in social media followers. Her eyes drifted, again to Chuck Norris, who sat watching it all with the calm certainty of a man who had nothing to prove. The night was young, but already Elena sensed the collision of philosophies that was building arrogance versus humility, spectacle versus substance. In a sport built on respect, the tension of its absence was palpable, and somehow she knew it would come to a head before the night was through. The exhibition continued at a relentless pace. 3 more matches had concluded, each one feeding the crowd's growing appetite for spectacle. Elena noted how the tone of the event had shifted. Fighters who focused on technique without showmanship received polite applause, while those who played to the cameras earned thunderous ovations. "We're witnessing a transformation tonight," she remarked during a broadcast break. "This exhibition was founded to showcase martial arts in its purest form, but the audience clearly wants more than just technical proficiency. It's entertainment." "Elena," her co-commentator countered, "these fighters are giving the people what they want, but at what cost to the traditions?" She pressed, aware of the cameras, but unable to hide her concern. The arena lights dimmed once more. A hush fell over the crowd as spotlights circled the octagon. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice reverberated through the arena, "please welcome our showcase performer, international action star, martial arts master, and cultural icon, Donnie Yen." The arena erupted as Yen emerged from the tunnel, his entrance accompanied by a pounding bass track and elaborate light show. Unlike earlier fighters, Yen wore a traditional kung fu uniform, a nod to his roots. Despite the modern spectacle surrounding him, the crowd rose to their feet, phones raised to capture his approach. At 50-plus years old, Yen moved with the fluid grace that had made him famous across decades of film work. But as he approached the octagon, Elena noted something in his demeanor that hadn't been apparent from a distance. A tightness around his eyes, a tension in his smile that seemed at odds with the confident persona he projected. "Donnie Yen brings unparalleled credentials to tonight's exhibition," Elena commented as he climbed into the cage. "A lifetime dedicated to martial arts, beginning with traditional Wu training under Master Bo Sim Mark and extending through multiple disciplines. His film work has introduced millions to Chinese martial arts traditions." Yen bowed to the crowd, then to the judges' table before taking center stage. His opponent for the exhibition match was introduced a respected MMA fighter named Jason Wong, who had transitioned to choreography and stunt work in recent years. "This showcase isn't scored as a traditional bout," Elena explained to viewers. "Rather, it's designed to highlight the techniques and forms that have made Yen an international sensation." The exhibition began with Yen demonstrating lightning-fast combinations, his hands moving with such speed that the crowd gasped in appreciation. Wong played his part perfectly, defending and occasionally attacking to give Yen openings for spectacular counters. "Remarkable speed and precision," Elena noted. "Yen's Wing Chun training emphasizes economy of motion, no wasted energy." For several minutes, the demonstration continued as planned, with Yen showcasing various techniques from his extensive repertoire. The crowd responded enthusiastically, particularly when he performed moves recognizable from his films. Then, without warning, the tone shifted. During an exchange near the fence, Wong landed a counter that caught Yen off guard. Nothing dangerous, but unexpected, a ripple of surprise moved through the crowd as Yen momentarily lost his composure. "That wasn't choreographed," Elena's co-commentator whispered. Yen recovered quickly, but something had changed. His movements became more aggressive, less exhibition, and more competition. Wong adjusted, clearly surprised by the shift. "Yen appears to be taking this to another level," Elena observed, keeping her tone neutral. The crowd sensed the change. 2. Their cheers growing louder as Yen abandoned the planned demonstration in favor of increasingly dominant techniques. Wong, caught unprepared for this shift, found himself genuinely defending rather than playing a part. Elena glanced toward the VIP section where Chuck Norris remained impassive. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched the unfolding deviation. The exhibition culminated with Yen executing a spinning kick that caught Wong in the chest, sending him to the mat with more force than was necessary for a showcase. The crowd erupted while Wong looked up at Yen with barely concealed confusion. Yen raised his arms in victory, turning to acknowledge every section of the cheering arena. When the applause began to fade, he gestured for the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying a hint of breathlessness. "It's always a pleasure to demonstrate the art I've dedicated my life to perfecting." Applause interrupted him briefly before he continued. Martial arts has evolved over the centuries from battlefield techniques to forms of personal discipline to, yes, entertainment. He smiled as he paced the octagon. Some purists might say we've lost something in that evolution, that fighters who bring showmanship to their art somehow dishonor tradition. Elena tensed at the direction Yen's speech was taking. Her eyes flicked again to Norris, who remained perfectly still. "But I believe martial arts must evolve or die," Yen continued. "The discipline serves the fighter, not the other way around. Those who can adapt their skills to engage audiences, whether in film or in competition, they're carrying the art forward." He paused, taking a drink from a water bottle someone handed him. The arena had grown quieter, sensing that Yen was building to something more controversial. "I've noticed we have some legends in attendance tonight," Yen said, his tone shifting, subtly, including Chuck Norris. Cameras swung to capture Norris, who acknowledged the mention with a slight nod, but nothing more. "Chuck and I represent different generations, different approaches," Yen continued, his era of martial arts films. They played their part in history, but times change. A murmur ran through the crowd. Elena leaned forward in her seat, unable to hide her discomfort at the direction this was heading. The martial arts we see in classic American films, the slow telegraphed punches, the exaggerated stances they make for good nostalgic viewing. "But they're relics," Yen said, his voice hardening. "Hollywood fighters versus actual martial artists. There's simply no comparison." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered Yen's boldness, while others shifted uncomfortably. Elena watched as Marcus Cruz, seated near the front, nodded enthusiastically, clearly enjoying the provocation. "Chuck Norris might be an American icon," Yen continued, pointing toward where Norris sat. "But with all due respect, what worked in the 70s doesn't hold up today. The techniques, the choreography. They were Hollywood inventions, not authentic martial arts. The atmosphere in the arena had transformed completely. What had begun as a showcase had become something far more confrontational." Elena struggled to maintain her professional demeanor as she commented. "Donnie Yen offering some pointed opinions about martial arts evolution," she said carefully. "Though many would argue that Chuck Norris's credentials, six-time world karate champion before his film career, speak for themselves." Yen wasn't finished. He paced the octagon like a prosecutor making his case. "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I respect what came before, but I'm not bound by it. Neither is the new generation." He gestured toward Cruz. "We're taking martial arts forward, making it relevant, exciting, connected to today's audiences." He turned directly toward Norris now, his voice carrying a challenge. "The old guard can sit and judge silently, but the future belongs to those who aren't afraid to evolve, to entertain, to give audiences what they really want." The crowd erupted once more, divided between those cheering Yen's audacity and those uncomfortable with the disrespect toward a legend like Norris. Through it all, Chuck Norris remained motionless, his expression unchanged. As Yen finally exited the octagon, Elena struggled to process what had just happened. What should have been a celebration of martial arts had somehow devolved into a generational challenge, tradition versus spectacle, restraint versus flashiness. "Well," her co-commentator said awkwardly as they prepared to break for commercials. "That was certainly unexpected." Elena nodded, watching as Yen made his way through the crowd, stopping to high-five Marcus Cruz, who looked absolutely elated by the provocation. "We'll be back after these messages," she said automatically, removing her headset the moment they went off air. "What was that?" her producer demanded through her earpiece. Elena shook her head, unable to answer. But as her eyes found Chuck Norris, again still sitting calmly, despite having been publicly called irrelevant, she couldn't help but wonder how he would respond, or if he would respond at all. The exhibition's carefully planned schedule suddenly seemed irrelevant. Something else was unfolding now, something unscripted and unpredictable. The night's true conflict was just beginning. During the broadcast break, the atmosphere in the California arena crackled with tension. Elena watched as attendees debated animatedly in the aisles, on social media, and among themselves. What had begun as a celebration of martial arts had fractured into something else, entirely a philosophical battle line drawn across generations. "We're back in 60 seconds, her producer warned through the earpiece. Elena nodded, taking a deep breath to compose herself. Professionalism demanded neutrality, but she couldn't deny her discomfort with how the exhibition had devolved. She glanced toward the VIP section again, where Chuck Norris remained seated, seemingly unmoved by Yen's provocations. Around him, other celebrities leaned in to offer comments or support, but Norris simply nodded politely, his attention returning to the octagon. "And we're back live from the International Martial Arts Exhibition in California," Elena announced as the broadcast resumed. "If you're just joining us, you've missed quite an eventful evening culminating in Donnie Yen's showcase that ended with some pointed comments about the evolution of martial arts in entertainment." Her co-commentator jumped in. "The arena's definitely buzzing after that speech. Social media is lighting up with reactions." "Indeed," Elena replied carefully. "While exhibitions like these often celebrate the diverse approaches to martial arts across generations, tonight has unexpectedly highlighted the tensions between traditional values and modern spectacle." On the floor, Donnie Yen had settled into his front row seat surrounded by his entourage and now joined by Marcus Cruz, who had abandoned his assigned place to sit with the action star. The two spoke animatedly, clearly feeding off each other's energy and the controversy they generated. The next exhibition match was announced, but Elena noticed how the audience's attention remained divided. Many eyes continued drifting between Yen's animated presence and Norris's composed stillness. As the match progressed, the crowd's energy felt scattered, distracted. The fighters' talented practitioners demonstrating complex judo techniques received only perfunctory attention until one executed a particularly flashy throw. Only then did the audience engage fully, responding to spectacle rather than substance. "The tone of the evening has certainly shifted," Elena observed during a lull. "These fighters are world-class judoka, but the crowd seems to be looking for something beyond technical proficiency." When the match concluded, Elena wasn't surprised to see Donnie Yen once again commanding attention. This time by standing to applaud the winner's more theatrical moments, while notably remaining seated during the traditional bow exchange. Marcus Cruz, emboldened by his new alliance with Yen, suddenly stood on his chair and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, Norris!" he shouted, loud enough to carry through the arena. "What do you think of actual fighting? Too intense for the old-school Hollywood types?" A hush fell over the nearby sections. Security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for this disruption of protocol. Chuck Norris turned slightly, acknowledging Cruz with nothing more than a brief glance, before returning his attention to the octagon, where the next fighters were preparing to enter. Cruz, unsatisfied with this non-response, persisted. "That's what I thought. Nothing to say when you're not reading from a script, right?" Yen placed a restraining hand on Cruz's arm, but his smile suggested approval rather than caution. The cameras naturally captured it all. Elena's producer spoke urgently in her ear. "Focus on this. the networks loving the drama. "We appear to be witnessing an unexpected confrontation developing at ringside," Elena reported reluctantly. Marcus Cruz seems determined to extend Donnie Yen's earlier comments into a more direct challenge to Chuck Norris. Her co-commentator leaned in. "For viewers just tuning in, Cruz is the rising MMA star who won earlier tonight with that spectacular knockout. He's clearly aligned himself with Yen's perspective on traditional versus modern martial arts approaches." Elena nodded, trying to maintain her professional distance while silently disapproving of the disrespect being shown. It's worth noting that Chuck Norris brings considerable credentials to any martial arts discussion before his acting career. He held the professional middleweight karate championship title for 6 consecutive years and founded his own discipline, Chun Kuk-do, on the floor. The disruption continued. Cruz had climbed down from his chair, but remained standing, playing. To the crowd around him, many of whom had begun recording the incident on their phones. "What do you say, Norris?" Cruz called out again. "Care to show us some of those slow-motion roundhouse kicks? Or maybe you need a stunt double for those, too." Scattered laughter rippled through the arena. Though Elena noted it was far from universal, many spectators appeared uncomfortable with the growing disrespect. Donnie Yen, perhaps sensing that Cruz was pushing too far, stood and addressed the audience more formally. "Let's remember, we're here to celebrate martial arts in all its forms," he said, his tone diplomatic, though his words carried a different message, including its evolution beyond traditional limitations. "The new generation brings energy and innovation that keeps our disciplines relevant." He turned toward Norris, offering what appeared to be an olive branch, but carried a backhanded compliment. "We respect our elders and what they contributed in their time. But martial arts must move forward, not remain stuck in the past." The crowd's reactions split audibly. Cheers from some sections, murmurs of disapproval from others. The division that had been simmering all evening crystallized into distinct factions, those embracing Yen's modernist entertainment-focused approach, and those uncomfortable with the disrespect toward traditional values embodied by figures like Norris. The arena seems almost physically divided now. Elena observed this exhibition has inadvertently become a referendum on martial arts philosophy. Is it primarily about discipline and respect, or entertainment and evolution? Her co-commentator nodded. And the question everyone's wondering, will Chuck Norris respond to these provocations? All eyes turned again to Norris, who continued watching the proceedings with the same composed expression he'd maintained all evening. If the provocations affected him at all, he showed no sign of it. The next match began, but Elena noticed how the audience's attention remained split. The actual competition had become secondary to the unexpected drama unfolding at ringside. During the match, Elena watched as an arena staff member approached Norris, leaning down to speak quietly in his ear. Norris listened, nodded once, and then returned his attention to the match. Whatever had been communicated, his demeanor remained unchanged. When the bout ended, the announcer's voice carried a slight edge of tension as he introduced a brief intermission before the final showcase. "Matches. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy a 15-minute break. Concessions are available in the main concourse." As the house lights came up slightly, Elena removed her headset for the break. "Any idea what that staff member said to Norris?" she asked her producer. "Rumor is they offered to move him to a private box away from the confrontation," came the reply. Apparently, he declined. Elena nodded, unsurprised. Everything about Norris's presence tonight suggested a man comfortable in his own skin, unruffled by provocations. As the break continued, she watched the dynamic on the floor evolve. Donnie Yen had begun moving through the crowd, signing autographs and posing for photos, his celebrity status amplified by the controversy he'd generated. Marcus Cruz shadowed him, clearly relishing his association with the international star and the attention it brought. More concerning was how their comments had spread through the arena. Elena could overhear nearby conversations where attendees debated martial arts philosophy with increasing intensity, many echoing Yen's dismissive attitude toward traditional approaches. "This is getting out of hand," she murmured to her co-commentator. "What started as a showcase has turned into some kind of generational culture war." "Drama sells," he replied with a shrug. "The network's probably thrilled with the ratings." Elena frowned. At what cost to the spirit of the event? Before he could answer, a commotion near the floor captured everyone's attention. Marcus Cruz had broken away from Yen's group and was approaching the VIP section directly, specifically, heading toward where Chuck Norris sat. Security personnel moved to intercept him, but Cruz held up his hands to indicate peaceful intentions. Though his body language remained confrontational, the entire arena seemed to hold its breath as he stopped a respectful distance from Norris's seat. "Mr. Norris," Cruz's voice carried in the suddenly quiet arena, "the fans are wondering if you have any response to what's been said tonight about old-school fighters versus modern martial artists." Cameras swiveled to capture what had become the evening's central drama. Chuck Norris regarded the young fighter, calmly, his expression giving away nothing. Some might call it disrespectful. Cruz continued, filling the silence. "I call it truth. The game has changed. What worked in your day just doesn't hold up anymore." Still, Norris remained silent, his gaze steady. Cruz, clearly unsettled by this non-reaction, pressed further. "I'm offering you a chance to defend your legacy here, unless you know Donnie's right." The silence stretched uncomfortably around the arena. Phones captured the moment from every angle. Elena held her breath, wondering if this would be the provocation that finally elicited a response. Instead, Norris simply extended his hand to Cruz. The gesture caught the young fighter off guard. He hesitated, then reached out to shake Norris's hand, confusion evident on his face. No words were exchanged, but the handshake itself spoke volumes. Norris acknowledging Cruz's presence without validating his provocation, maintaining his dignity without escalation. As Cruz withdrew, clearly unsure how to interpret this response, a slow chant began in one corner of the arena. "Nor R, nor Ris." It started with just a few voices, but spread steadily section by section. Not everyone joined, and many continued supporting Yen and Cruz's position. But the chant grew unmistakable, gaining strength and volume. "Nor Ris, nor wrist, nor Ris." Cruz retreated to where Donnie Yen waited, their expressions suggesting they hadn't anticipated this turn in public sentiment. The chant continued, drowning out their conversation. Elena put her headset back on as the director counted down to resuming broadcast. "We're witnessing a remarkable shift in the arena's energy," she reported as they went live again. "What began as provocations against martial arts legend Chuck Norris has evolved into a growing show of support for the values he represents: discipline, humility, and respect." Her co-commentator nodded. The crowd seems to be responding to Norris's composure in the face of these challenges. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. As the chant continued, Elena watched Donnie Yen's expression tighten. The international star had clearly expected his perspective to dominate the evening, but the audience's divided response suggested he'd miscalculated. Elena continued, "Is whether this philosophical confrontation will remain verbal or take a more direct form as the exhibition continues." She didn't have to wait long for her answer. As the house lights dimmed for the next introduction, Donnie Yen suddenly approached the announcer and whispered something in his ear. The man looked surprised but nodded, adjusting his notes as Yen returned to his seat, now looking directly at Chuck Norris. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the arena. "There has been a change to our program before our final showcase. Donnie Yen has requested an opportunity to demonstrate techniques with a volunteer from our audience." A spotlight swung dramatically to illuminate Chuck Norris in his seat. "Mr. Norris," the announcer continued, Would you honor us by joining Mr. Yen in the octagon for an impromptu demonstration? The crowd erupted, some cheering the audacity of the challenge, others gasping at its directness. The spotlight remained fixed on Norris, who sat unmoving, the center of attention, yet somehow separate from the spectacle surrounding him. An extraordinary development, Elena commented, her professional tone barely concealing her shock. Donnie Yen appears to be directly challenging Chuck Norris to enter the octagon. The arena held its collective breath, every eye fixed on the martial arts legend who had yet to speak a single word all evening. The philosophical division that had been building for hours had finally reached its breaking point. Now everyone waited to see how Chuck Norris would respond. The spotlight remained fixed on Chuck Norris, harsh and unwavering against the dimmed arena. The crowd's initial reaction, gasps and cheers, had faded to tense silence. Thousands of spectators held their breath, waiting for his response to Donnie Yen's public challenge. Norris remained seated, his expression unchanged. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Elena found herself leaning forward in the announcer's booth, microphone temporarily forgotten as she too waited. Then, with deliberate calm, Chuck Norris stood. The simple action sent a ripple through the arena. He made no grand gesture, no acknowledgement of the spotlight or the thousands of eyes tracking his every move. He simply rose, straightened his black button-down shirt, and began walking toward the octagon. The crowd erupted, the sound crashing like a wave against the arena walls. Phones lifted in unison, capturing what was quickly becoming the night's defining moment. The chant resumed louder than before. Norris, nor Riss, nor wrist. Elena fumbled for her microphone, professional instincts returning. Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Norris appears to be accepting Donnie Yen's challenge. At 70-plus years of age, the martial arts legend and cultural icon is making his way to the octagon. Her co-commentator jumped in, his voice tight with excitement. This is unprecedented. Norris hasn't participated in a public martial arts demonstration in years. As Norris walked, Elena noted how the crowd's energy shifted. The division remained. Some cheered for what they hoped would be Yen's triumph over an outdated legend. Others rallied behind Norris's quiet dignity. But the atmosphere had transformed from confrontational to anticipatory. Whatever differences existed in philosophy, everyone recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. On the floor, Donnie Yen stood by the cage, watching Norris's approach with an expression that mixed confidence with something less definable, perhaps uncertainty at the legend's willingness to accept his challenge. Behind him, Marcus Cruz bounced on his toes, grinning broadly at the spectacle they'd created. "Looks like Grandpa's coming down to school," Cruz called out loud enough for nearby microphones to pick up. "Hope his health insurance is paid up." The comment drew mixed reactions, laughs from some, glares from others. But if Norris heard, he gave no indication, continuing his measured approach to the octagon. When he reached the cage door, a security guard moved to open it for him, but Norris gently waved him aside, opening it himself before stepping through with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his presence all evening. Inside the octagon, Donnie Yen waited, arms crossed, a smile fixed on his face. The two men stood approximately 10 FT apart. Yen in his traditional kung fu uniform, Norris in his simple black shirt and slacks, two legends of martial arts cinema, face to face. Elena narrated, aware of the historic nature of the moment. Donnie Yen representing a more modern dynamic approach to martial arts entertainment, and Chuck Norris, whose career began with authentic competitive achievements before transitioning to film. The referee approached uncertainly, clearly unsure. How to proceed with this unplanned confrontation? Yen waved him off, stepping forward to address Norris directly, his voice amplified by the microphone he'd been handed. Chuck Norris, he began playing to the audience as much as addressing the man before him. "I respect your contributions to martial arts history, but tonight is about evolution, showing how far we've come from the basic techniques of the past. He gestured to the crowd. These fans deserve to see the difference between Hollywood martial arts and authentic fighting skills, between choreographed moves and real combat effectiveness. Norris remained silent, his eyes fixed on Yen, his posture relaxed yet attentive. "I propose a simple demonstration," Yen continued, circling slightly. "No contact, just movement. I'll demonstrate modern techniques. You show your traditional approach and let the audience judge which is more effective, more relevant to today's martial arts." The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided cheers from Yen's supporters, calls of respect from those backing Norris. Through it all, Chuck Norris remained motionless, his silence creating a strange power vacuum that Yen's words rushed to fill. Unless, of course, Yen added with a slight edge to his voice, "You feel your techniques wouldn't stand up to the comparison." It was a clear provocation, but still Norris offered no verbal response. Instead, he simply nodded once acceptance without engagement in the surrounding drama. Yen seemed momentarily thrown by this continued silence, but recovered quickly. "Excellent. We'll each demonstrate for 1 minute. I'll begin." Without waiting for confirmation, Yen handed off the microphone and stepped to the center of the octagon. What followed was undeniably impressive. A 60-second showcase of lightning-fast strikes, spinning kicks, and fluid combinations. Each movement flowed into the next with cinematic precision, his body a blur of controlled power. The crowd responded enthusiastically, particularly when Yen incorporated movements recognizable from his films. He finished with a spectacular spinning kick that stopped precisely at full extension, demonstrating perfect control. Remarkable speed and precision from Donnie Yen. Elena commented, "His Wing Chun influence is evident in those chain punches, while the kicks draw from his Wu background." Yen completed his demonstration with a flourish, turning to acknowledge the cheers before gesturing for Norris to take his turn. The contrast in their approaches couldn't have been more stark before Norris had even moved a muscle. "Your turn," Yen said, slightly breathless, but clearly satisfied with his performance. "Show us the old-school approach." Chuck Norris stepped forward, his movements unhurried. Where Yen had filled the octagon with explosive energy, Norris carried a presence that somehow made the space feel both smaller and more significant. He stopped at the center, feet positioned shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed at his sides. Then he simply stood there. Seconds passed. The crowd grew restless, uncertain. Some called out encouragement, others began to murmur in confusion. Marcus Cruz laughed loudly from ringside. "Looks like he's frozen up," Cruz shouted. "Stage fright." "Old man." But Elena noticed something in Norris's stance. A rootedness, a complete absence of tension despite the pressure of the moment. His breathing remained steady, his focus unwavering. "What we're seeing," she commented quietly, "is something rarely displayed in modern martial arts demonstrations. Complete composure. Before technique comes centering, something traditional practitioners spend years developing." Yen shifted his weight impatiently, the smile on his face tightening. "Perhaps a more dynamic demonstration," he suggested, gesturing toward the waiting crowd. Norris acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. Then, with deliberate precision, he executed a single front kick. The movement was neither flashy nor particularly fast, but it contained a quality that silenced the crowd, perfect form, absolute control, and an economy of motion that spoke to decades of disciplined practice. He followed with a simple combination: block, strike, pivot, kick. Each movement flowing into the next with mathematical precision. No wasted energy, no theatrical flourishes, just pure technical execution. "Textbook traditional karate," Elena observed, her voice carrying a note of reverence. "What appears simple actually requires extraordinary discipline to execute with that level of precision." Norris continued his demonstration, each technique performed as if teaching a class rather than entertaining an arena. He moved through fundamental stances and strikes, the building blocks upon which all martial arts were constructed. His expression remained focused but calm, unconcerned with the audience's reaction. The crowd's response transformed as the demonstration progressed. The initial restlessness gave way to a different kind of attention, quieter, more focused. Not everyone appreciated what they were seeing, but those who understood martial arts fundamentals recognized the mastery on display. "Notice how he's not performing for the crowd," Elena pointed out. "He's demonstrating the discipline itself, the foundation that makes more spectacular techniques possible." When Norris completed his demonstration, he simply returned to his starting position and bowed slightly to the discipline, not to the audience. The contrast with Yen's flourishing conclusion could not have been more pronounced. The audience's reaction was mixed, but undeniably powerful. Some sections erupted in cheers, while others sat in respectful silence. The chant began again, stronger than before. "Nor wrist, nor wrist, nor wrist." Donnie Yen reclaimed the microphone, his expression difficult to read. "Two very different approaches," he said, playing to the crowd. "Modern evolution versus traditional basics. Which do you prefer?" The question was clearly meant to favor his own dynamic demonstration, but the crowd's response wasn't what he'd anticipated. The arena divided audibly cheers for both men, the volume nearly equal. "Seems like we have a split decision," Yen continued, his confidence visibly wavering. "Perhaps we should settle this more directly." He turned to Norris, lowering the microphone slightly, a light sparring demonstration just to show the audience how these different styles would match up in practice. The challenge hung in the air, transforming the exhibition into something far more personal. Elena held her breath, aware that they were witnessing a moment that transcended simple entertainment. "This has moved beyond a demonstration," she commented. "Donnie Yen appears to be directly challenging Chuck Norris to a controlled sparring match. The philosophical divide has become physical." All eyes turned to Norris, whose expression remained unchanged. He hadn't spoken a single word since entering the octagon, letting his brief demonstration speak for itself. Now, faced with a direct challenge to engage in actual combat, however controlled, he simply looked at Yen with the same steady gaze. Then, with the slightest of nods, he accepted. The crowd erupted, phones raised higher, social media feeds flooding with real-time updates. Security personnel exchanged concerned glances, clearly unprepared for this development. The exhibition's organizers appeared at the edge of the cage, gesturing frantically, but neither man paid them any attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena said, struggling to maintain her professional composure, "it appears we're about to witness an impromptu sparring session between two martial arts legends, a completely unplanned confrontation that represents far more than physical technique. This is a clash of philosophies, of generational approaches to an ancient discipline." Yen handed the microphone to someone outside the cage and returned to the center where Norris waited. The referee approached uncertainly, looking between the two men. "Light contact only," he instructed, his voice betraying his nervousness at suddenly officiating this unexpected matchup. "This is a demonstration, not a competition. I'll stop it if things escalate." Yen nodded impatiently. Norris gave a single calm nod of acknowledgement. "Begin when ready," the referee said. Stepping back to give them space, the arena fell silent as the two men faced each other. The philosophical division that had been building all evening, now embodied in physical form. Donnie Yen, the dynamic modernist who believed in evolution and spectacle. Chuck Norris, the traditionalist who let discipline and respect speak through action rather than words. In that moment of perfect tension, Elena realized they were witnessing something rare, a genuine collision of values that transcended the individuals involved. Whatever happened next would resonate far beyond this arena, touching on questions central to martial arts itself. Was it primarily about entertainment or discipline, evolution or tradition, spectacle or respect? The answer was about to unfold before thousands of witnesses, none of whom could look away. The silence that gripped the California arena felt almost supernatural. 20,000 people collectively holding their breath, creating a vacuum of anticipation. In the center of the octagon, Donnie Yen and Chuck Norris faced each other, separated by mere feet, but representing opposing philosophies that spanned generations. Yen moved first, shifting into a fluid stance, hands raised in a traditional Wing Chun guard, but modified with the flashier positioning he'd made famous in film. His energy was kinetic even in stillness, a coiled spring ready to release. His eyes darted quickly around the cage, aware of the cameras, the angles, the spectacle he was creating. Norris remained centered, his stance grounded and economical. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. His guard was higher and tighter than the more open cinematic positions, reflecting his competitive karate background rather than screen choreography. Unlike Yen, his awareness seemed entirely focused inward and on his opponent, the cameras and crowd apparently forgotten. Notice the fundamental difference in their starting positions. Elena commented softly, aware that most viewers needed no commentary to feel the tension. Yen's stance is more dynamic, designed to transition quickly into spectacular techniques. Norris maintains a traditional competitive guard, practical, efficient, battle-tested. For several seconds, neither man moved. The arena's air conditioning system became audible in the perfect stillness. Somewhere in the upper deck, a child whispered, a question, the sound, carrying in the silence. Yen's breathing was controlled but visible. Norris's chest barely seemed to move. Then Yen initiated, closing the distance with blinding speed, launching a combination of strikes designed to showcase his renowned hand speed. The crowd gasped at the sudden explosion of movement. 3 rapid-fire straight punches followed by a flashy back fist that whistled through the air. The techniques were executed with cinematic precision, each one distinct enough to be captured perfectly by cameras. Norris didn't retreat. Instead, he adjusted his position minimally, slipping the first strikes with subtle head movement and blocking the follow-up with textbook precision. No wasted motion, no dramatic evasion, just fundamentally sound defensive technique executed, with decades of muscle memory. Where Yen moved feet, Norris moved inches. Extraordinary defense, Elena noted as Yen reset. Norris isn't matching speed with speed. He's relying on positioning and timing, the cornerstones of traditional training. Yen circled, light on his feet, shadow boxing slightly as he reset. His performance energy remained high, each movement designed to build anticipation. Norris pivoted economically to maintain the proper angle, his focus unwavering, his expression unchanged. You can see 2 completely different approaches to energy conservation. Elena observed Yen constantly in motion, creating momentum. He can channel into explosive techniques. Norris minimizing unnecessary movement, preserving energy while maintaining optimal positioning. Yen pressed forward again, this time incorporating the fluid footwork that had become his signature in films like Ip Man. He circled, feinted with his lead hand, then launched a spectacular spinning back fist that transitioned seamlessly into a high roundhouse kick, a combination that would have made for a perfect film highlight executed with undeniable technical skill. Again, Norris's response was a study in economy, a simple pivot that caused Yen's spinning back fist to miss by inches, followed by a duck under the roundhouse kick. As Yen completed his rotation, slightly off balance from the missed techniques, Norris executed a single counter-straight punch that wasn't thrown to land, but to demonstrate the opening Yen had created with his flasher approach. The punch stopped, precisely at the point where it would have made contact in a full-contact match. Textbook countering. Elena's co-commentator noted with appreciation. Yen created visual excitement, but Norris found the tactical advantage. The pattern continued Yen's dynamic camera-ready techniques against Norris's fundamental soundness. With each exchange, a story was being told without words. Yen moved like a highlight reel. Norris like a textbook. One performed for the audience, the other demonstrated principles. 3 minutes into the sparring, subtle shifts became apparent. Yen's breathing had deepened slightly, the cost of his constant motion and explosive techniques beginning to accumulate. Norris, meanwhile, appeared exactly as he had at the beginning, centered, economical, breathing steady. "What we're witnessing is fascinating," Elena said, fully engaged as both commentator and martial artist. Yen's techniques are undeniably impressive, faster, more acrobatic, visually stunning. But Norris's approach is revealing something profound about martial arts fundamentals, how positioning, timing, and efficiency can neutralize even the most spectacular attacks. As the sparring continued, Elena noticed subtle shifts in the crowd's reaction. The initial gasps at Yen's speed and flair were giving way to murmurs of appreciation for Norris's measured counters. Phones still recorded, but the energy had transformed from pure entertainment to something more educational. The audience was being educated through observation, recognizing that flash and substance were not always aligned. At ringside, Marcus Cruz's expression had transitioned from smugness to reluctant fascination. His eyes tracked Norris's movements. With growing attention, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by the natural response of a fighter recognizing effective technique. Yen seemed to sense this shift in the arena's energy. A nearly imperceptible tightening around his eyes suggested awareness that the narrative wasn't developing as he'd anticipated. His combinations became more aggressive, his techniques more elaborate, as if determined to create a moment spectacular enough to definitively prove his point. He launched a blistering series of strikes, jab, cross, hook, elbow, then transitioned smoothly into a spinning back kick aimed at Norris's midsection. When that missed by millimeters, he recovered instantly and exploded into a jumping spin kick aimed high, the kind of technique that had become his trademark in films. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he fully committed to the acrobatic attack, his body rotating through the air with undeniable athleticism and precision. The crowd inhaled collectively. This was the cinematic moment they'd been waiting for. Norris, for the first time, used footwork to create distance rather than just angling. One step back, weight balanced perfectly between both feet. The kick missed by a wider margin than previous exchanges, and for a brief moment, Yen was overextended, his balance compromised by the commitment to the spectacular technique. In that fractional window of vulnerability, Norris executed a simple sweep, not with power meant to damage, but with precise timing that connected with Yen's supporting leg. Just as his weight was shifting back to it after the kick, his positioning was perfect. His timing impeccable, the result was physics in action. Yen's momentum, combined with the perfectly timed sweep, sent him to the mat. Not hard, not painfully, but unmistakably, he landed on his side. The impact audible in the suddenly silent arena. For one perfect frozen moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then the crowd erupted, phones capturing the moment from every angle as Yen rolled smoothly back to his feet. Professionalism masking what must have been shock. A textbook demonstration of how fundamentals can overcome even the most dynamic techniques, Elena commented, struggling to keep excitement from her voice. That sweep wasn't about strength or speed. It was about timing and recognizing the moment of imbalance that follows any committed technique. From her vantage point, Elena could see the shift in Yen's eyes. A professional reassessment, a fighter recalibrating his approach. He nodded slightly to Norris. An acknowledgement between martial artists that transcended their philosophical differences. Yen reset, his expression now focused in a different way. Less performing, more assessing. He approached more cautiously, initiating with probing techniques rather than committed combinations. His jab came out with less theatrical flair, but more tactical purpose, testing Norris's reactions rather than trying to overwhelm them. Norris remained as he had been centered, economical, present. His expression hadn't changed. Showing neither triumph at the successful sweep nor concern at Yen's renewed focus, he met the probing jab with a textbook parry, maintaining the same disciplined approach that had served him throughout. The sparring dynamic shifted into something more substantive. Yen abandoned some of the more theatrical elements, his techniques becoming more direct, more practical. His footwork tightened, his guard higher and more defensively sound. It was as if the sweep had reminded him of his foundation before the films, before the stardom, when he was simply a dedicated martial artist, learning fundamentals like any other. In response, Norris began demonstrating more active counters, showing not just defensive soundness, but offensive efficiency. A clean check hook here, a straight right there, each delivered with the same economy of motion, but carrying more intentional pressure. Fascinating adjustment, Elena observed. Yen is adapting, moving away from pure spectacle toward more fundamentally sound approaches, and Norris is opening up his game slightly, showing more of his technical repertoire now that Yen has shifted to a more traditional engagement. The crowd sensed the change, too, their reactions becoming more appreciative of the technical exchange, rather than simply responding to flashy moments. A different kind of excitement filled the arena. Not the adrenaline rush of spectacle, but the deeper appreciation of witnessing mastery. Even those who had been firmly in Yen's camp seemed captivated by the martial arts lesson unfolding before them. The philosophical division that had defined the earlier part of the evening was giving way to unified appreciation for the discipline itself. Marcus Cruz, who had been vocally supportive of Yen throughout, fell noticeably silent at ringside, his expression transitioning from cocky certainty to grudging attention. His eyes tracked Norris's movements with particular focus, perhaps seeing, for the first time, how fundamentals executed with perfect discipline could be more effective than crowd-pleasing flashiness. The sparring continued for several minutes, neither man definitively dominating, but a narrative nonetheless emerging through their exchanges. When Yen employed fundamental techniques with proper form, he found more success. When he returned to prioritizing spectacle over substance, Norris's efficiency created clear advantages. "What we're seeing transcends the individuals involved," Elena commented. "This has become a physical dialogue about martial arts philosophy, a demonstration of how foundational principles remain effective regardless of era. While techniques, designed primarily for visual impact, often sacrifice practical effectiveness 8 minutes into what had become an impromptu masterclass, Yen appeared to make a decision. His energy shifted again, returning to the more theatrical approach that had defined his initial entries. But there was a difference now, a self-awareness, almost an acknowledgement that he was consciously choosing spectacle over substance. He launched another elaborate combination jab, spinning back fist, jumping knee, turning kick, each movement flowing into the next with cinematic fluidity. It was beautiful to watch, a display of athletic prowess and coordination that justified his reputation as a physical performer. This time, instead of simply evading, Norris executed a perfectly timed counterstrike, stepping in at the precise moment between Yen's spinning back fist and jumping knee, delivering a straight punch that stopped precisely at the point where contact would have occurred in a full contact match. The freeze frame moment told the entire story. Norris's technique had found its mark while Yen was mid-flourish. Had this been actual combat rather than controlled sparring, the exchange would have ended decisively. Both men recognized the significance of the moment. Yen paused, acknowledging the clean technical win with a slight nod that carried respect rather than frustration. Norris stepped back. No celebration, no gloating, just the same centered presence he'd maintained throughout. The referee moved between them, sensing a natural conclusion. "Demonstration complete," he announced. Though no formal endpoint had been established, the crowd erupted in a standing ovation, not just for the spectacle they'd witnessed, but for the lesson embedded within it. The chant resumed, louder than ever. "Nor wrist, nor wrist, nor wrist." But mixed with it now came acknowledgement of both men. The arena united in appreciation for what they'd witnessed, rather than divided by philosophical differences. Donnie Yen approached Chuck Norris, meeting him at the center of the octagon. He offered his hand, the gesture containing multitudes' acknowledgement, respect, perhaps even a hint of newfound understanding. Norris accepted the handshake firm, but not dominant, respectful rather than triumphant. For the first time all evening, Norris spoke. The words were meant for Yen alone, not the crowd, not the cameras. Elena couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Yen's expression change surprise, then thoughtful consideration, followed by a genuine nod of respect. The two men stood together, briefly at the center of the octagon, no longer opponents but practitioners of the same discipline. In that moment, the philosophical divide that had defined the evening seemed to dissolve, replaced by recognition of a shared foundation that transcended their differences in approach. As they separated, the contrast in their exits told the final chapter of the story. Yen acknowledged the crowd with raised hands, accepting their appreciation with the showmanship that had defined his career. But there was a new quality to his gestures, more genuine, less performative. Norris simply walked toward the cage door, uninterested in the spotlight, content to let his actions speak for themselves, an extraordinary conclusion to what began as a philosophical confrontation. Elena summarized Chuck Norris without grandstanding or even speaking publicly, has provided perhaps the most powerful statement on martial arts values possible, letting skill, discipline, and respect communicate through action rather than words. As Norris exited the octagon, Marcus Cruz approached him. The young fighter's brash confidence noticeably diminished. He said something to Norris, who paused briefly to respond. Whatever wisdom was shared in that moment. Cruz's expression suggested it had landed with impact. The exhibition would continue with its scheduled final showcase, but Elena knew the defining moment of the night had already occurred. In an event designed to highlight the evolution of martial arts, it was the timeless values, discipline, efficiency, respect, humility that had ultimately commanded the spotlight. Sometimes, she reflected, evolution meant remembering what should never change, even as the world around it transformed. And sometimes the most profound lessons were taught not through words, but through silent demonstration of principles that had endured for centuries. The true power of martial arts, after all, had never been in its spectacle, but in its substance, not in what it appeared to be, but in what it truly was at its core. The final scheduled matches of the exhibition proceeded, but they felt like epilogue rather than climax. The arena hummed with lingering energy from the unexpected confrontation between Donnie Yen and Chuck Norris, a physical philosophy debate that had transcended mere spectacle. Throughout the arena, conversations centered not on the current matches, but on what had transpired between the two legends. Elena Park maintained her professional commentary, analyzing technique and acknowledging impressive moments in the remaining bouts. But her thoughts kept returning to the lessons embedded in what they'd witnessed. The other fighters seemed to feel it, too. Their performances carried a different quality now, less focused on crowd reaction, more attentive to technical execution. It was as if Norris's silent demonstration had recalibrated the very atmosphere of the exhibition. As the last match concluded and the event moved toward its formal closing ceremony, Elena removed her headset during a break. The producers were buzzing with excitement about ratings and social media engagement, but their voices seemed distant, disconnected from the deeper significance of the evening. "That was something special," her co-commentator said, shaking his head in amazement. "Can't believe we got to call it." Elena nodded. "More than special, important. I think everyone in this arena just received a masterclass in martial arts values." "You think Yen knew what he was getting into?" he asked, lowering his voice despite the muted microphones. Elena considered this. "I think he expected to demonstrate the superiority of his approach. I don't think he anticipated being on the receiving end of such a profound lesson." In the VIP section, Chuck Norris had returned to his seat as composed as when he'd first arrived. If the confrontation had affected him physically or emotionally, he showed no sign of it. Several celebrities and fighters approached to shake his hand or exchange words, each interaction brief but seemingly meaningful. What struck Elena was how little his demeanor had changed. No swagger, no playing to cameras, just the same centered presence he'd maintained throughout. Donnie Yen had disappeared backstage immediately after the sparring session. Rumors circulated through the arena that he was upset, that he was injured, that he was rethinking his earlier provocations. Elena suspected something different, something more nuanced was unfolding behind the scenes. A production assistant approached, leaning down to speak near her ear. "There's movement backstage. Yen's coming back out, apparently. Producers want you ready to comment." Elena nodded, reaching for her headset. Whatever was happening, it felt like the true conclusion to the evening's unexpected narrative. Marcus Cruz sat alone now, no longer courting attention or playing to nearby cameras. His earlier swagger had evaporated, replaced by a pensive quality that made him look younger, more vulnerable. Occasionally, his eyes drifted toward where Norris sat, his expression suggesting internal conflict. A fan approached for an autograph, and Elena noticed how differently Cruz interacted, less performative, more genuinely attentive. "Back in 60 seconds, her producer warned through the earpiece. Elena straightened her notes, preparing for the broadcast's conclusion. On the arena floor, staff were arranging for the closing ceremony, positioning a podium and testing the microphone. Security personnel conferred in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward the backstage area where Yen had disappeared, and were back live for the conclusion of the International Martial Arts Exhibition, Elena announced when they returned. An event that proved far more dramatic and perhaps more educational than anyone anticipated. Her co-commentator nodded. "The scheduled demonstrations were impressive, but I think everyone here will be talking about the impromptu sparring session between Donnie Yen and Chuck Norris for years to come." Indeed, Elena agreed. What began as a philosophical division about martial arts values, tradition versus evolution, substance versus spectacle, transformed into a physical dialogue that spoke volumes without words. On the floor, the exhibition's director approached the podium, tapping the microphone to ensure it was live. He was a former karate champion who had transitioned to event promotion, his effort to build bridges between traditional martial arts and modern entertainment, sometimes creating tensions like those that had erupted tonight. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude tonight's exhibition, I want to thank all the fighters, demonstrators, and special guests who made this event possible." Standard closing remarks followed acknowledgments of sponsors, reminders about merchandise, announcements about next year's dates. But Elena noticed how the crowd's attention remained divided. Many eyes still drifting toward Chuck Norris, many phones still documenting his every move. An energy of anticipation persisted, as if the audience collectively sensed that the evening's true conclusion had yet to unfold. "Before we conclude," the director continued, his tone shifting subtly, "we have an unscheduled speaker who has requested a moment to address you all. Please welcome back to the stage, Donnie Yen." A murmur ran through the crowd. As Yen emerged from backstage, he looked different, somehow more subdued. His earlier performative energy replaced by something more thoughtful. He had changed from his traditional uniform into simple training clothes, as if shedding the ceremonial for the authentic. He approached the podium with measured steps, accepting the microphone with a nod of thanks. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying a gravity absent from his earlier showmanship. "I came to this exhibition to demonstrate martial arts as I've come to understand it through my career dynamic, evolving, entertaining." He paused, scanning the arena briefly before continuing. Elena noticed how he made eye contact with the crowd, rather than playing to cameras, a subtle but significant shift in focus. "Earlier tonight, I made statements about traditional approaches to martial arts. I suggested that evolution meant leaving certain things behind, that the old ways were outdated, less relevant to today's world. The arena had fallen completely silent, every person present sensing that they were witnessing something significant. A moment of genuine reflection from an international star more accustomed to carefully managed public appearances. "I was wrong," Yen said simply. The admission hung in the air, powerful in its directness, unadorned by qualification or explanation. Elena felt a shiver of recognition. How rarely public figures acknowledged error with such clarity. What I experienced in the octagon tonight wasn't a clash between old and new, but a reminder that true martial arts has a core that never becomes outdated. Chuck Norris demonstrated something I had perhaps forgotten in my focus on innovation, that fundamentals, executed with perfect discipline, are timeless. Yen turned slightly, looking toward where Norris sat. Their eyes met across the distance, an acknowledgement that transcended the physical space between them. When we spoke privately after our sparring, Mr. Norris said something I won't forget. He said, "Innovation without foundation is just movement. True evolution in martial arts doesn't discard the past. It builds upon it." The crowd responded with appreciative applause, many nodding in agreement. Elena found herself leaning forward, struck by the authenticity of the moment. This wasn't public relations damage control, but genuine realization. "I've spent my career trying to make martial arts exciting, accessible, spectacular," Yen continued, his voice taking on a more personal quality. "Those aren't wrong goals. But tonight, I was reminded that without respect for the foundation for the discipline, efficiency, and humility at the core of all martial arts, that spectacle becomes hollow." He placed both hands on the podium, his posture shifting slightly, as he addressed the audience more directly. "Many of you know my story, how I began training under my mother, Master Bo Sim Mark, learning traditional Wu forms before I ever stepped in front of a camera. The fundamentals she instilled in me made everything else possible. The film career, the recognition, the ability to innovate." Elena hadn't expected this turn toward personal history. It contextualized the evening's confrontation in a new light. Not just philosophical differences, but a reconnection with roots. "Somewhere along the way," Yen admitted, "I began to prioritize the evolution over the foundation. It's easy to do when audiences respond to spectacle, when innovation brings recognition. But the foundation doesn't need applause to remain essential." The crowd had fallen completely silent, captivated by this unexpected vulnerability from a figure known primarily for strength and dynamism. To the younger fighters here tonight, especially those who, like me, may have prioritized flash over substance, remember that the most impressive techniques mean nothing without the fundamentals to support them. And that respect, both for opponents and for the art itself, isn't an outdated concept, but the very thing that gives martial arts its power. Elena felt a tightness in her throat as she listened. In her years of commentary, she'd rarely witnessed such a genuine moment of reflection and growth, especially from someone of Yen's stature. The cameras captured his expression in close-up on the arena's massive screens. No performance, just authentic realization. "I came here tonight thinking I had something to prove," Yen concluded, his voice quieter now, forcing the audience to lean in. "Instead, I was reminded of something I needed to remember. For that lesson, I'm grateful." With a respectful bow, deeper and more deliberate than his earlier ceremonial gestures, he stepped away from the podium. The crowd rose in a standing ovation that felt markedly different from earlier cheers, less about spectacle, more about genuine appreciation for the humility being displayed. As Yen made his way across the floor, he stopped where Marcus Cruz sat. Elena couldn't hear their exchange, but the body language was unmistakable. Yen speaking earnestly, Cruz listening with uncharacteristic attentiveness. Their conversation was brief, but intense. Cruz nodding with serious consideration as Yen placed a hand on his shoulder. When they parted, something had shifted in the young fighter's demeanor. A seed planted that might with time grow into understanding. The exhibitions, Formal conclusion proceeded, but Elena's attention was drawn to the arena exit, where Chuck Norris was quietly departing. No fanfare, no grand goodbye. Simply leaving as he had arrived with dignity and humility intact. A few spectators noticed and applauded. Others called his name, but Norris acknowledged them with nothing more than a slight nod as he continued toward the exit. As we conclude our broadcast, Elena said into her microphone, "We're left with powerful reminders about martial arts at its core. In a world that often prioritizes spectacle over substance, flash over foundation, tonight served as a testament to the enduring power of discipline, respect, and humility." Her co-commentator nodded. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected moments. I think everyone here, fighters, fans, even us commentators, leaves with a deeper appreciation for martial arts as not just physical technique, but philosophy and action. Indeed, Elena agreed. The exhibition may have featured spectacular techniques, but its most memorable moment was one of quiet mastery. A reminder that true strength often speaks through action rather than words. As the broadcast wrapped, Elena watched Donnie Yen approach Chuck Norris at the exit. The two exchanged words once more, their conversation shielded from cameras by the natural flow of departing spectators. Then something unexpected. Yen bowed, deeply, the traditional gesture of respect between martial artists. Norris responded with a bow of his own, acknowledgement between equals. No cameras captured this private moment. It wasn't performed for audience or accolades. It was simply truth expressed through tradition, the very essence of what martial arts had always been about. Later, as the arena emptied and crews began dismantling the equipment, Elena found herself standing at the edge of the now vacant octagon. The space seemed smaller without the energy of conflict filling it, yet somehow more significant for what had transpired there. The lights had been dimmed to conservation levels, casting long shadows across the mat where history had unfolded. Hours earlier, a voice behind her broke her reverie. Quite a night. She turned to find Marcus Cruz, his earlier bravado replaced by something quieter, more introspective. He stood with hands in pockets, looking at the cage with new eyes. It was, she agreed, not what anyone expected. Cruz nodded, looking at the empty cage. "I've been training since I was 14, you know. Got my first belt, started winning local competitions, then discovered that getting attention online was faster than earning respect in dojus." Elena waited, sensing he needed to speak rather than be spoken to. This version of Cruz, thoughtful, reflective, seemed entirely different from the brash showman who had begun the evening. "My coach tried to tell me," he continued, "said I was cutting corners, skipping fundamentals for the flashy stuff that looks good on highlight reels. I thought he was just old school, didn't understand how the game has changed. And now," Elena asked quietly. Cruz gestured toward the octagon. "Tonight was the first time I felt like maybe I've been chasing the wrong thing." He admitted, "All that noise I make, all that trash talk, and Norris just stood there, didn't say a word, and commanded more respect than I ever have." He shook his head, a rueful smile forming. "Yen told me something just now. Said respect can't be demanded, only earned. Said I should ask myself whether I want to be remembered for how loud I was or how skilled I was. It's never too late to refocus." Elena offered, "The fundamentals are always there, waiting to be remembered." Cruz nodded, a hint of his usual confidence, returning, but tempered now with something new. "My next fight, it's going to be different. Still me, but better, more substance. I'll look forward to commentating it," Elena said with a smile. As Cruz walked away, Elena took one last look at the octagon. What had begun as an exhibition of technique had transformed into something far more valuable, a reminder that in martial arts, as in life, the most important battles often weren't about defeating others, but about conquering one's own ego, about finding the humility to recognize that some traditions endured because they contained truths worth preserving. She thought about the contrast between Yen's entrance and exit, how he had arrived full of certainty about his position, only to depart with newfound respect for what he had perhaps forgotten, and how Norris had maintained the same centered presence. Throughout, unmoved by provocation, unaffected by vindication. One had learned something valuable. The other had simply been himself. The lights dimmed further throughout the arena, leaving only security illumination. Tomorrow, this space would host a different event, different spectacles. But tonight, something timeless had unfolded here. A lesson in respect, discipline, and quiet power that would resonate far beyond these walls. In a world that increasingly valued noise over substance, spectacle over skill, tonight had been a reminder that true mastery often spoke most eloquently through silence, that genuine strength required no validation beyond itself, and that some values respect, humility, discipline would never become outdated, no matter how the world around them evolved. As Elena finally turned to leave, she carried that reminder with her, not just as a commentator, but as someone who had dedicated her life to an art form that at its best was about far more than physical technique. It was about character revealed through action rather than words. Sometimes the most powerful statement was made in silence, and sometimes the most important evolution was remembering what should never change. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.